Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to What's Left. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, I'm going to be talking about just two things. This is kind of a special edition. This show is going to be on the week between Christmas and New Year's for most of you, and as such, I'm sort of giving myself the week off, more or less, and taking a little holiday vacation, if you will, because this is something I've talked about before. It's kind of a tradition now with the show. We're going to spend this week just talking about two things. One, why is Christmas on December 25th as opposed to any other day? And the natural follow-up, why is New Year's on January 1st as opposed to any other day? We're going to answer those two vital questions. We want to start, of course, with then Christmas. Now, right at the top, you have to realize something, which is that based on how we, by which I mean Americans and a lot of Europeans, how we celebrate, how we embrace Christmas, how we embrace the traditions of Christmas, we have to say that this is Christmas, and this is Christmas, this is Christmas, and this, and this, and this. But this is not. Because you know those people who go around saying that Jesus is the reason for the season? He isn't, and he never was. Now that half of you are about to write nasty emails, let me explain. The season is because of astronomical patterns. Until relatively recently, people were much more aware of the movement of the sun and the moon and the stars than we are, because such movements were necessary. They were signs of the change of the seasons, of annual events. It told them when to plant, when to reap, when seasonal rains were coming, when game was going to be plentiful. In effect, the sky was their almanac. Now, in prehistoric times, and even well into recorded history, people believed that things like the sun acted willfully, or were controlled by gods that acted willfully. And each year, watching the sun get lower and lower in the sky each day as winter approached, a fear was created. It came into being that one of those years, one of those cycles, that sun was going to keep on sinking until it disappeared below the horizon, leaving the people in perpetual cold and dark. So every year, when the sun stopped doing that and then started getting a little higher and higher in the sky each day, it was a cause for celebration. This is the time of the winter solstice. This occurs in the northern hemisphere, depending upon exactly where you are, around December 21st or 22nd. Solstice is derived from two Latin words, and you'll have to excuse, my Latin's not very good, so you have to excuse my poor pronunciation, but it comes from two Latin words, sol and sistera, which together mean the sun stands still, which is what it appears to do at the solstice. A little lower each day, then stops, and then a little higher each day. All over the northern hemisphere, this was a time to celebrate. Ancient Egyptians had their celebrations. Ancient Greeks had their celebrations. In fact, in the very earliest days of the Greek celebrations, it actually involved a human sacrifice. The Druids celebrated. It was celebrated in Iran. Native American peoples in North America, including the Pueblo and the Hopi, had their celebrations. In pagan Scandinavia, the winter festival was the Yule. Great Yule logs were burned. People drank mead around bonfires, listening to or spinning tales of great sagas and great events of the past. A boar was sacrificed to the chief god Odin, who donned a broad-brimmed hat and a magic blue cloak and sped around the world at night on his great white horse. Mistletoe, which was regarded as a sacred plant because it grew on the most sacred tree, the oak, sprays of mistletoe were cut, and a sprig was given to each family to hang over their doorways for good luck. Now this, by the way, is our first reminder that a lot of our holiday traditions, including the term Yuletide, which means time of the Yule, a lot of our traditions are drawn from pagan ones, including decorating with garlands, wreaths, the Christmas tree itself, along with the man who could magically go around the entire world in the course of one night. But for the date of Christmas, is why it's that day, now we're getting into the space that lies between history and interpretation. Because no one knows the day of the year that Jesus was born. Not even sure what year he was born. But no one knows the time of year. No one even knows what season it was. To the extent the Bible can be trusted as a source, we can be confident that he was not born in the winter, because shepherds did not watch their flocks by night at that time of year. The flocks would most likely have been corralled. In fact, watching their flocks by night was most commonly done in the springtime to protect newborn lambs from wolves. This has led some people to insist that Jesus must have been born in the spring, but that one mention in the Bible is an awfully thin reed on which to build such a big conclusion. Now, what's more, the earliest known use in English of the word Christmas, or Feast of Christ, Christmas, was in a list of feast days with mass days, which was set down in England in 1038, 1,000 years after Jesus died, and no saint's day is listed in that book for December 25th. In fact, not only did early church leaders, and we're talking like 2nd and 3rd century here, not only did early church leaders argue about when Jesus was born, the options included, here we go, January 2nd, March 21st, March 25th, April 18th, April 19th, May 20th, May 28th, November 17th, November 20th, and yes, December 25th. There are actually some leaders, such as Origen, who argued that the whole thing was pointless and wrong because you shouldn't celebrate the birth of Jesus at all because birthdays were for pagan gods, not for the one true Christian God. Still, even so, by the mid-3rd century, the idea for having some day to celebrate the birth of Jesus was getting established. But still, it took some time for that idea to become formalized and for a date to be chosen. In 313, Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, legally allowing Christianity in the Roman Empire. And actually, in fact, he went considerably beyond that, because the text actually says it was, quote, proper that the Christians and all others should have liberty to follow that mode of religion which to each of them appeared best, which I have to say shows a lot more tolerance than some folks here today do. Oh, and by the way, as a sidebar, contrary to popular belief, Constantine considered himself an emperor of the Christian people, but he did not actually formally convert to Christianity and get baptized until he was on his deathbed in 337. And Christianity did not become the formal religion of Rome until 380, 43 years after he died. But, getting back to the point, the first recorded date of the birth of Jesus being celebrated on December 25th was not until 336, 300 years after he died. And it wasn't until 350 when Pope Julius I officially declared that the birth of Jesus would be celebrated on December 25th. The thing is, that just brings us back to the original question. How did the chosen date come down to that as opposed to any of the other possibilities? I mean, that was the question. To answer that, first remember that these events were taking place in Rome, which by then had become the nerve center of Christianity. The date brings us back to the winter solstice, because the Romans, like many other ancient peoples, had their solstice celebrations. In Rome, it was called Saturnalia. Now, this is originally a feast day to the god Saturn, but over time it grew to be a gigantic fair and festival of the home. It began with the sacrifice of a pig. It involved riotous merrymaking, feasting, gambling. Houses were decorated with laurels and evergreens. Schools were closed. The army rested. No prisoners were executed in this time. Friends visited one another, bringing good luck gifts of things like fruit, cake, candles, dolls, jewelry, incense, and more. Temples were decorated with evergreens. Processions of people danced through their streets, their faces blackened or wearing incredible masks when wearing fantastic hats. Masters feasted with their slaves, who supposedly were free to say and do what they pleased, although I doubt they felt very comfortable pushing that privilege very far, since in a couple of days they'd be back to being just slaves again, but at least hypothetically they could. And notice here again, by the way, traditions, including decorating your home, laurels, visiting friends, gift-giving, holiday parties. These are not Christian traditions. These are Roman ones, pagan ones. Now, the old Roman goddess of the solstice was Angerona, whose festival day was, logically enough for a goddess of the solstice, December 21st. But when Mithraism, personified by the god Mithra, was introduced in Rome in the mid-2nd century, the goddess was largely supplanted by Mithra's day of seasonal rebirth, which was December 25th. Now, Mithra, himself a composite of earlier beliefs, became amalgamated with a Roman god named Solus Indigeni, which my weak Latin says means the needed or the necessary sun, a god which in turn came from the Pelasgian titan of light called Helios. Now, this new being, this composite of two composites, was Sol Invictus, the invincible or the unconquered sun. Mithra's day, December 25th, became De Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquerable sun. When the Emperor Aurelian proclaimed Mithraism the official religion of the Roman Empire in 274, the day became an official holiday. All right, so put this all together. Before Constantine the Great issued his Edict of Milan, being a Christian in Rome could get you killed. Refusal to participate in the imperial cult was regarded as treason. During the Great Persecution carried out by the Emperor Diocletian in the years 303 to 311, Christian buildings and the homes of Christians were torn down, their sacred books were gathered up and burned. Christians themselves were arrested, tortured, mutilated, burned, starved, and forced into gladiatorial contests for the amusement of spectators. So the thing is, if you wanted to celebrate the birth of Jesus, if you wanted to celebrate the birth of the man you considered your Savior, and the idea, again, of having such a celebration by then was pretty well established among Christians, you had to hide the fact. So since the time is purely symbolic and the date really arbitrarily chosen because no one knows the actual date of his birth for certain, and it's really based on tradition and nothing more, what better time to do it than Saturnalia, when everyone else is celebrating and no one would notice? And what better day to pick than December 25th, when the birthday of the unconquerable sun could be thought of as the birthday of the unconquerable sun. Indeed, according to St. John Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople, writing in the late 4th or early 5th centuries, which means it's just a few decades after Christianity had become the official religion of Rome, he said, quote, "The Roman Church purposefully placed the keeping of Christmas between two popular folk festivals, Saturnalia and the Calends of January, in order to give Christians something to celebrate about undisturbed, while others were engaged in secular merrymaking." And by the way, if you care, Chrysostom apparently is, I believe, Greek for golden-mouthed. Apparently he was regarded as a great orator with great eloquence. All right, by the year 354, 4 years after Pope Julius I had designated as such, December 25th had become accepted in Rome as the date of the Feast of Christ, Christ's Mass, Christmas. Gradually, most of the Christian church agreed. Now, once Christianity became the legal religion of Rome in 380, the church began appropriating what old pagan customs it could, with the result that the merry side of Saturnalia was adopted and then adapted to the observance of Christmas. So, that's why Christmas is on December 25th, because Christians hid within, then adapted pagan celebrations of the winter solstice. By 1100, Christmas was the peak celebration for all of Europe. But let me finish this up, that even then this was not universally accepted. Origen's conviction that celebrating the birth of Jesus was for pagan gods persisted among conservative Christians for centuries, including among the separatists and the Puritans who settled the early colonies of Plymouth and Boston, respectively. They regarded Christmas as a pagan celebration with no biblical justification. In fact, there were laws against it. As an illustration of this attitude, we have the journal of Plymouth Colony Governor William Bradford, who, in the entry for 1621, recalled what he called a passage, quote, rather of mirth than of weight. And I'm quoting the passage here. On the day called Christmas Day, the governor called him out to work as was used, but most of this new company, and here he's referring to a group of men who had arrived in November of 1621 on a ship called the Fortune, but most of this new company excused themselves and said it went against their consciences to work on that day. So the governor told them that if they made it a matter of conscience, he would spare them until they were better informed. So he led away the rest and left them, but when they came home at noon from their work, he found them in the street at play, openly, some pitching the bar and some at stool ball and such like sports. So he went to them and took away their implements and told them that it was against his conscience that they should play and others work. If they made the keeping of it a matter of devotion, let them keep to their houses, but there should be no gaming or reveling in the streets. Since which time nothing has been attempted that way, at least openly. And remember, he was writing that somewhere around 1631, 1632, about 10 years after the fact. And this is true not just here, but in Europe as well. And in fact, for example, in 1647, Great Britain's Puritan-dominated Parliament abolished the feast of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun, the latter of which is known in the U.S. as Pentecost. Now, back here in the U.S., in 1659, the Mass Bay colony, that is Boston, banned celebrating Christmas altogether. The ban remained in place for 22 years until 1681, and even then, it was only because a governor of the newly restored British monarchy overturned the ban. But even at that point, it was still another 5 years before the first recorded Christmas celebration in Boston, which took place in 1686. And for many years, Thanksgiving remained the most important seasonal holiday in New England. It's also true that in the wake of the Revolution, interest in Christmas faded in the former colonies because it was seen as a British holiday with which we wanted nothing to do. In fact, it didn't become a major holiday in the U.S. until a religious revival in the early 1800s spurred interest in the day, particularly in the South. As a result, it was Louisiana in 1837 which became the first state to make it a holiday. But even at that point, New England continued to lag behind. In Plymouth, the first time Christmas is even mentioned in a town newspaper, as far as anybody can tell, is 1825. As late as 1856, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow could write that the old Puritan feeling prevents Christmas from being a cheerful, hearty holiday in the region. But he added, we are in a transition state, which actually he was quite right, so it proved to be, because by 1860, that same Plymouth paper, which hadn't mentioned it before 1825, was filled with ads for Christmas presents. And by the end of the century, Christmas was as much a part of Plymouth and the rest of New England as it had become for the rest of the country. And with that, we are going to take a break. And we're back. All right, so that's why Christmas is on December 25th as opposed to any other day of the year. So now the natural follow-up, why is January 1st New Year's Day? Because it wasn't always true. So why? Why January 1st? Okay, in large part, the reason has to do with the convenience of the Roman Senate, a calendar almost no one uses anymore, and the stubbornness of tradition. Now, the earliest recorded New Year's celebrations is believed to have been in Mesopotamia about 4,000 years ago, when Babylonians began the year with the first new moon after the Vernal Equinox, and greeted it with a multi-day celebration called Akitu. This is a logical time to start the year. The vernal equinox is the first day of spring, which of course comes in mid-March, and of course it's a time of beginnings, of rebirth, of regrowth, of renewal. Some other ancient cultures, however, used different days, but all of them had some astronomical or astrological significance. For example, the Egyptians used the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which is the brightest star in the constellation Canis Major, the big dog. That took place in mid-July, and it predicted the annual flooding of the Nile, which was so important to their agriculture. Persians used the vernal equinox, which again is the first day of spring. The Phoenicians used the autumnal equinox, which is the first day of fall. And the Greeks used the winter solstice, which again is the first day of winter. All of these choices carried some meaning beyond the day itself. But January 1st has no such significance. So why January 1st? Well, an early Roman calendar designated March 1st as the first day of the new year, a fact which may explain something you might have wondered about. If March is the first month of the year, September is the seventh month, and the Latin for seven is septem. Likewise, October, November, and December. Octo, Latin for 8, novum for 9, decem for 10. So September, October, November, and December were named that because they were the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year. But according to apparently general, although not universal, but general agreement among historians, in 153 BCE, the Roman Senate moved the first day of the year to January 1st because that was the beginning of the civil year. That was the day the newly elected Roman consuls started their term in office. And it was just regarded as more convenient to have the civil year and the legal year start on the same day. It's also a reasonable time to do it because the January, month of January, was named for Janus, the Roman god of gates, doors, and beginnings, basically the god of all transitions, the god of transitions, of changing from one thing to another or passing through one thing to another. In fact, Janus had two faces so that he could see the past and the future simultaneously. Now, that Roman calendar was a lunar one. It was based on the moon with a 10-month and 304-day year. But the thing is, the solar calendar, which is the one that drives the solar year, which is the one that drives the changing of the seasons, so the one that was really important, that and the lunar year just do not match up very well. By the time of Julius Caesar, this calendar, this lunar calendar, was seriously out of whack with the solar year. So in 46 BCE, Caesar introduced a new solar-based calendar, which is called, cleverly enough, the Julian calendar. And that calendar decreed that January 1st would be the first day of the year. Now, after the Roman Empire fell, the generally accepted year for that being 476 CE, that is a common era, as Christianity was spreading across Europe, the Catholic Church, which remember had previously adopted and adapted the part of Saturnalia, adopted and adapted some Roman customs to Christianity. But that church now felt, with the fall of the empire and the spread of Christianity, that it was in a position to downplay pagan, anti-Christian festivals, such as those that had come to surround the new year in Rome. So in 567, the Second Council of Tours banned the use of January 1st as the first day of the year. And this was a period of time when if the church said it, governments did it. In the Middle Ages in Europe, as a result, the official New Year started at different times, on different days, in different places. In some places it started on December 25th. Which by then, again, was the traditional birthday of Jesus. Some used the old day of March 1st. Some used March 25th, which is the Feast of the Annunciation, and again, right around the Vernal Equinox. Some even used Easter, even though the day of that changed from year to year. But remember, Julius Caesar had set January 1st as New Year's Day in 46 BCE, which means that by the time the Council of Tours acted, the practice of keeping January 1st as New Year's Day had been going on for 613 years. It, at that point, was so well established that a lot of people simply ignored whatever the official day was and just kept January 1st as the first day. But speaking of Julius Caesar and his calendar, it was flawed just like the lunar one that it replaced, just not by nearly as much. Even so, by the latter 1500s, this Julian calendar was again seriously out of whack with the solar year. And again, remember, it's the solar year because that's what determines the moon has nothing to do with when spring starts or when the rains are going to come. It's the sun that is the solar year that you're going to use to determine that. So in any event, it was seriously out of alignment with the solar year. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII oversaw the design of a new, more accurate calendar called the Gregorian calendar, again, cleverly enough. That introduced the use of leap years to keep this calendar from getting too far out of whack with the solar year. And by the way, it proved that this use of leap years actually somewhat overcorrected the discrepancy between the calendar and the solar year. So a further change was instituted, one where century years, only century years divisible by 400, not by 4, are actually leap years. So that 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 wasn't, and 2100 won't be. Now, Pope Gregory also surrendered to tradition, and he restored January 1st as the first day of the new year. Now, Catholic countries in Europe were quick to adopt this new Gregorian calendar. Spain, France, and Italy did it the very year it was released, but Protestant countries only did so gradually, fearful that the Antichrist in Rome was trying to trick them into worshiping on the wrong days. Scotland, for example, didn't adopt a calendar until 1600, and England, which had used March 25th as the start of the year since sometime in the 1100s, England didn't finally make the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. Remember, this is before the Revolution, so this also means us. England didn't finally make this change until 1752. 170 years after the Gregorian calendar was instituted. By that time, the Julian calendar was 11 days off from the Gregorian calendar, which was corrected by simply removing 11 days from the calendar, with the result that Wednesday, September 2nd, 1752, was followed by Thursday, September 14th, 1752. Now, there are tales of riots breaking out with people believing their lives would be 11 days shorter, or that they lost 11 days of wages and so on. And the fact is, such sentiments existed, but historians are now of the opinion that these riots never actually happened. But it is also true that the change of calendar from the Julian to the Gregorian was an issue in the 1754 parliamentary elections. So it's really hard to credit the idea that there were no protests of any sort. Anyway, that's it. January 1st is the first date of the year, not due to any special meaning of the day itself, but for the convenience of the Roman Senate, due to the Julian calendar, which basically no one uses anymore, and the surrender of Pope Gregory XIII to the persistence and stubbornness of tradition. So that's going to be it. We are going to now be taking next week off. It's the last week of the month, which you always take off. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, and at which time we are going to be offering our awards for the Clown of the Year for 2016 and the Outrage of the Year for 2016. So you might want to look forward to that. But for right now, we'll just say that in the spirit of Constantine, let me say Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus. For all the folks like me out there, Happy Winter Solstice. And to all of us, Happy Holidays and Happy New Year. Because like the man in the story said, we are halfway out of the dark. We will see you in 2 weeks. Until then, you have the best time you possibly can, the best holidays you possibly can. And until then, as always, peace.